In this video, we're going to transform this worn-out patio into one of the best patios in the world. This young man took advantage of his family's absence and decided to build a fully lit patio with a natural, smoke-resistant heater. This video shows him working on one of the biggest projects he's ever undertaken, building a unique and distinctive patio. For over a year, he hasn't touched his family's garden for any project, but now he's decided to work on it again. His family has been using this old fire pit for years, so he figured it was the perfect time to renovate the space to match the jacuzzi, sauna, and other crazy features he's added to the house. He started with the first step, measuring the distance. He used a 14-foot long board with a nail in the center and spun it around to draw a perfect circle with a 7-foot radius. Next, he sketched a small pathway to connect the new patio to the old one using a simple and approximate method by eye. In the past, he might have dug all this by hand, but now that he's almost 30, his shoulders and neck have been sore all year. So he decided to use heavy equipment, and I absolutely love heavy equipment. They started digging the patio to a depth of 6 or 7 inches. At first, they tried moving the soil with a wheelbarrow, but it was difficult, so he brought this trailer from his dad's workshop to speed up the process and make the job easier. After a few hours of digging with the backhoe, he managed to remove most of the soil. Then he grabbed the shovel to refine the edges, ensuring that they were precise so he wouldn't have to fix the grass later. Now that he's reached a consistent depth of about 7 inches, it's time to install this synthetic fabric layer, which will prevent weeds from growing under the patio in the future. After that, the first batch of stones arrived. This patio will use large stone slabs along with some additional materials for the base. The first thing he laid down was gravel about 1/3 of an inch in size. This gravel is extremely clean, free of dust or small particles, which makes it excellent for water drainage. They filled the entire area with about 3.5 inches of this gravel. Next, it was time for the second layer of gravel, this time smaller, around 1/4 of an inch. He spread about 2 inches of this finer gravel over the first layer. Finally, he used a wooden board to level the surface with a slight slope of about 1.5 inches for water drainage. Of course, the foundation method varies depending on location. In areas without frost, these steps can be simplified. But because winters in his area are harsh, a thick foundation and proper drainage are absolutely necessary, no exceptions. Now, it's time to prepare the mold for pouring the concrete and building the natural fireplace. He grabbed an old wooden board and marked the center point on it. Then he used a thin wooden strip, secured it in the middle, and started measuring the inner and outer radius of the fire pit or natural fireplace. After that, he drew the circle on the wooden board and cut it using a power saw. Once all the circles were done, he took 2x4 wooden pieces and cut multiple sections of equal length. This would determine the height of the natural fireplace, approximately 12 to 14 inches. Next, he secured these pieces onto the wooden circle he had cut, forming the basic framework of the mold. At this stage, the mold had both an inner and outer section, but it still needed a covering to hold the concrete in place. So he used an 8-inch thick panel with a white melamine coating. This was useful because it provided good flexibility for the required curves, and the melamine would make it easier to remove the mold from the concrete once it dried. He cut several strips from the panel and fastened them around the frame. With that, the mold was now ready for concrete. But before pouring, there was one final step. He had some 1.5-inch diameter metal pipes, so he cut 4 equal pieces. Then he drilled a few holes in the outer wall of the mold and inserted the pipes. These would act as ventilation openings for the fire pit, helping to reduce smoke during burning. Finally, he cut some small wooden pieces and secured them to the frame to hold the pipes in place when pouring the concrete around them. Then he started pouring the concrete into the mold. He used a crack-resistant type of concrete, which is just regular concrete, but reinforced with fiberglass fibers to make it stronger and reduce heat-induced cracks. Any standard concrete would have worked, but this one was priced well, so he went with it. He mixed the concrete with some water until it reached a pudding-like consistency. Then, he began filling the mold. His brother would scoop the concrete with a shovel and place it into the mold while he tapped it with a small wooden mallet to ensure it filled all the gaps and left no air pockets inside. They ended up using about 7 bags of concrete. They decided to stop pouring about 5 centimeters before reaching the top, as they felt the fire pit would be too tall otherwise. After that, they left it to dry for a few days. Once it had dried, he removed the mold and noticed that the metal pipes he added for ventilation worked perfectly. However, he wished he had used slightly larger pipes to allow more airflow. But overall, it was an experiment and he would learn from it for next time. Now he was ready to move on to the next step. The hardest part of this project was shaping the curve to match the circular floor. In his workshop, he had some cedar wood, measuring 5 by 20 centimeters. He could have used treated wood since it was cheaper, but he just went with what he had. He cut 3 pieces from this wood. Then he used a special drilling tool to create mounting holes along the sides of each piece. After joining the wood together, he used wood glue to secure them properly. Then he fastened them with hidden screws to ensure a stronger hold and help the glue set well. He let the glue dry for a while before starting on the curves. Next, he measured the distance to draw the required circle, using the same wooden piece like a giant compass. Once he had the shape drawn, he used a power power saw to cut the wood. He then used the first piece as a template to cut another one with the exact same dimensions. After that, he prepared several wooden pieces of the same length to serve as the support posts for the bench, just like he did for the fireplace mold. He secured each post with long screws to keep them steady. Once all the posts were in place, he flipped the wooden frame over and attached the top surface in the same way. The result was a sturdy structure capable of supporting the weight of the stone and concrete they would be adding later. He expected it to last for many years. Then he repeated the same steps to build a second bench. The next step was preparing the bench for the natural stone. He needed to install cement boards to ensure the stone adhered properly. To cut these boards with minimal dust, he used a sharp knife and scored the surface multiple times. Then he placed a wooden strip under the cut line and pressed down until the board snapped cleanly. After that, he trimmed the back edge to get a precise fit. He began attaching the boards to the bench. Since the boards had some flexibility, he decided to wrap them around the curves. Now it was time to unpack the stone. He had purchased this stone from a local company for around $2,000. This would give the benches and fireplace the appearance of being made entirely from stone. This type of stone is essentially the face or outer layer of large real stones, which are cut from massive natural rocks. It has a thickness of about 2.5 centimeters, making it lighter and easier to use as a decorative material. The stone would be attached to the concrete using a special mortar designed for natural stone like this. Finally, he decided to get a cement mixer, since he still had a lot of work to do, whether mixing mortar or concrete. Also, mixing by hand was starting to wear him out. The installation process was simple. He covered the back of the stone with mortar, making sure to apply a larger amount since he was working on a curved surface. If it were a flat surface, a smaller amount would have been enough. Next, he sprayed a little water on the concrete board or the surface where the stone would be attached. Then he pressed the stone firmly into place and used his finger to remove any excess mortar that squeezed out from the edges. By the end of the day, the stone was supposed to be firmly set. The process was like a puzzle. He had to fit the stones together in a cohesive way to achieve a natural and elegant final look. The smaller the gaps between the stones, the better the appearance. For the corners and edges, there was a special type of stone that wrapped around them easily, giving a cleaner, more polished look. He continued this process for a few days, until he had covered the entire fireplace and both benches with stone. Now he was ready to pour the concrete top for the fireplace and benches. First, he measured the inner and outer diameters of the fireplace. Then he transferred the measurements onto a compressed wood board, using the same method as before. After that, he used some leftover wooden pieces and secured them with screws along the drawn lines. He also had a special edge mold with a stone-like texture, which he would use as the sidewalls of the mold. The wooden supports would help hold it in place while the concrete was poured. Before pouring, he sprayed the mold with a release powder to ensure the concrete would come out easily once dry and to give it a uniform colour that matched the stone pattern being imprinted. After preparing the mix, he added a few extra bags of crack-resistant concrete. Each bag filled the mold about halfway. Then he placed some fiberglass rods to reinforce the slab, ensuring it stayed intact when lifted and placed onto the fireplace. He gently tapped the edges with his fingers to release any air bubbles or pockets. Next, he used a trowel to level the surface and let it dry for an hour or two. Once it was dry enough that he could press on it without it sticking to his hand, he knew it was ready for stamping. He had a rubber stamp with the stone texture he wanted. He dusted the concrete with some release powder, then carefully pressed the stamp onto the surface in a systematic way to transfer the pattern. This was the same technique used for stamping designs on roads, but on a smaller scale. Since it was his first time trying this, he was eager to see the results. The next day, he removed the edge mold and side supports. Then, he washed off the excess powder. The final result was a concrete surface that looked like natural stone. He repeated the same steps for the bench tops and the small table. The most expensive part of this process was the release powder, stamp, and edge mold. That mold alone cost around $100. However, after purchasing the tools, each surface only cost about $20 to complete. Plus, he still had plenty of release powder left for future projects. Before installing the concrete tops, he used this metal ring, which is specifically designed for smokeless fireplaces. It has a very important feature. When you light a fire inside it, no smoke comes out at all. He ordered it online and installed it inside the concrete fire pit. The structure consisted of 8 pieces that were fastened together with screws to form a circle. He used construction adhesive to secure the ring to the concrete. The ring's diameter was about 30 inches, while the inner diameter of the concrete was around 32 inches, leaving an air gap of about 1 inch around the ring. The idea was that the hot air would move between the ring and the concrete, preventing smoke from forming. This is what made the fireplace completely smokeless. To install the concrete top of the fireplace, he applied some mortar along the upper edges, then placed the top in position. He measured the dimensions to ensure all edges were even. Then he moved on to the benches. Since the mortar wouldn't stick to wood, he used a strong construction adhesive instead. he applied it in a zigzag pattern on the wooden surface before securing the concrete top in place. At this point, the benches and fireplace were almost finished. Next, he prepared a crucial mixture. This material would be used to fill the gaps between the stones. He kept mixing until it reached a liquid consistency, then filled a piping bag with a few scoops of the mixture. The watery consistency made it easier to squeeze the bag and fill the gaps completely. The application method was simple. He just applied the mixture between the stones until the gaps were fully filled. It didn't have to be perfect because, after a few hours, he would smooth and clean it up. Once a few hours passed and the material had firmed up without being too dry, he used a tool to level the joints and press the material into the gaps. Then he went over it with a brush to clean and refine the final look. As for the exterior tiling, before installing the stones, he placed plastic edging around the designated area. This edging would prevent weeds from growing and create a clear separation between the tiles and the grass. He chose 2-inch thick stone tiles for 2 reasons. First, they provided enough space to install LED lights between the joints, a cool feature we'll see later. Second, their large size reduced the number of joints, meaning fewer gaps to fill and less need for lighting. Since the tiles were large, he had to cut some of them to fit the desired shape. He used a 9-inch concrete saw that he had bought from Canada, and it was highly effective. Each cut took about 30 seconds to a minute. Once he reached about halfway through the thickness, he removed the excess pieces using a hammer or simply stepped on them if they were large. After placing each stone in position, he had to lift and adjust it multiple times to ensure it was level with the surrounding tiles. Each tile weighed between 50 and 300 pounds, making the process physically demanding. After a few days, he had to clean the edges to make them fit better. Sometimes he even had to cut entire stones, like the one you see here. After 3 or 4 days of extremely exhausting work, the tiling was finally done. Now it was time for the last step, the best step. The step you probably clicked on this video for in the first place, installing the LED lighting to give the backyard that glowing, stunning look. The gaps between the stones were about 2 to 2.5 inches wide. He could have installed the lights right away, but there were a few issues to solve first. The smaller stones weren't fully stable yet, so he decided to add about ½ an inch of this material to secure them in place and prevent them from shifting. As for the larger stones, they were already heavy and difficult to move. Once he filled the gaps, he swept away the excess material and then used an air blower to remove any remaining dust. After that, he sprayed water over the area, following the instructions on the adhesive materials packaging. This ensured the stones were firmly bonded together. Now for the lighting. He always gets excited when it comes to lighting. He used incredibly powerful LED strips that weren't limited to just one colour. They could change to multiple colours. Typically, these lights are used around houses or balconies, but he got creative and used them in a completely different way. The LED strips were encased in a silicone layer, making them waterproof, perfect for placement under the tiles. He laid the LED strips between all the stones, using about 3 boxes in total. Each box contained 3 strips, each around 30 feet, and they could all be connected together. He chose this specific type because he could control it using his phone. Plus, these strips supported every colour imaginable, including various shades of white lighting. Basically, any colour he wanted was available. Every 30 centimeters, he used a securing pin to keep the LED strips firmly in place, ensuring they wouldn't shift even if objects were placed on top of them. Now, for the final touch in this video, he covered the LED strips with a special type of tempered glass, designed specifically for this kind of fireplace. He bought about 25 bags of it and chose a type without sharp edges to make it safe to walk on. Then he filled the gaps above the lights with this glass, hoping it would help diffuse the lighting smoothly and beautifully. That was the last step in the project, and I know you've all been waiting for this, the final moment, to see how it looks at night. Let's check it out. Honestly, the result was way better than expected. The smokeless fireplace worked perfectly, better than any other fireplace. After 5 minutes of being on, not a single bit of smoke came out, thanks to its design and the way it was built. You can even see how the fire extends toward the ventilation openings, where fresh oxygen enters, allowing for a highly efficient burn. The stone benches looked amazing, and the LED lighting gave the entire space a magical ambience that you won't find anywhere else. As you can see, he can control all the colours from the app and select any shade he wants. Now the big question, how much did this whole project cost? The entire project cost around $10,000. If you liked this video, let me know what challenges you'd like to see next. And now for the usual, like, share and subscribe, or maybe I'll skip the outro this time.